The mahogany-paneled law office felt suffocating as I waited for the reading of Grandpa Richard's will. My sister Catherine sat across from me, perfectly poised in her designer suit, occasionally shooting me looks of practiced concern that didn't reach her eyes. Poor Julia, she whispered loudly to her mother. She really should be in assisted living, not here dealing with all this stress. I gripped my worn leather satchel tighter, fighting back the familiar anger. For the past year, Catherine had been carefully crafting the narrative that I was mentally unstable, incompetent to handle my own affairs. All because I'd chosen to help run Grandpa's antique restoration business instead of pursuing a real career like her corporate law practice. The gaming addiction. She'd tell relatives at family gatherings, voice dripping with fake sympathy. Julia spends hours playing with old computers in Grandpa's workshop. She needs help, not an inheritance to waste. What she called gaming was actually my work restoring vintage electronics, a specialty that had doubled the shop's revenue in the past 3 years. But Catherine never bothered to understand that. The family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, finally entered carrying a thick envelope. "Thank you all for coming," he began, adjusting his glasses. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Richard James Montgomery." Catherine straightened in her chair, smiled confident. She'd spent months convincing Grandpa to update his will before his sudden heart attack. I'd overheard her more than once, pushing him to protect Julia from herself. "To my beloved granddaughter Catherine, Mr. Harrison Reed, who has always understood the value of traditional success." I tuned out the list of financial assets being awarded to my sister, watching her smile grow with each addition. Our parents nodded approvingly. They'd always preferred Catherine's path, her obvious ambition. And to my granddaughter Julia, the lawyer continued, Catherine's smile turning smug. "I leave my antique restoration business, workshop, and all contents therein." How appropriate, Catherine couldn't resist commenting. The broken stuff for the broken sister. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "There is also a sealed letter for Julia, to be opened privately." I took the envelope with trembling hands, ignoring Catherine's theatrical sigh. "That's all?" Mother asked, frowning. "The business can't be worth much." Actually, a new voice interrupted from the doorway. "That depends on what you consider valuable." We all turned to see an elderly Asian gentleman entering the office, his expensive suit and commanding presence drawing all eyes. "James Chen," he introduced himself, nodding to Mr. Harrison. "Richard's business partner. I believe it's time to explain what young Julia has really inherited." Catherine's smile faltered slightly. "Business partner. Grandpa never mentioned." "No," Mr. Chen smiled slightly. "He wouldn't have. Just like he never mentioned that the antique shop was merely a front for our real business." He turned to me. "Julia, my dear, have you opened your grandfather's letter yet?" With shaking fingers, I broke the seal and began to read. "My dearest Julia, if you're reading this, then James has arrived right on schedule. You see, while everyone thought I was just tinkering with old relics, James and I were building something extraordinary. Those vintage computers you've been restoring. They contain technology that was decades ahead of its time. Patents that were buried, innovations that were hidden away. Until now. You saw what others missed. While they dismissed you as damage, you were learning, understanding, preserving crucial pieces of technological history. Now it's time for you to know the truth about what you've really inherited." My vision blurred as I read further, the implications slowly sinking in. When I looked up, Catherine's face had lost all its confidence. Because Grandpa's letter wasn't just about the past. It was about the future, and that future was about to change everything. "Impossible," Catherine whispered, staring at the documents Mr. Chen had spread across the conference table. "These patents, these contracts, are worth approximately $2.8 billion. Mr. Chen finished calmly. "Your grandfather and I spent 40 years acquiring and protecting technological innovations that were ahead of their time. Innovations that are only now becoming viable." I sat quietly, still processing the contents of Grandpa's letter. The vintage computers I'd been restoring weren't just antiques. They were prototypes, each containing carefully hidden designs and schematics for technology that had been decades ahead of its time. But the shop, Mother protested weakly. It was just a dusty old storefront. "The perfect cover," Mr. Chen smiled. "Who would suspect that behind those shelves of old radios and typewriters We were preserving the future of quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy. Catherine's lawyer mask finally cracked. This is ridiculous. Julia can't possibly manage this kind of technology. She's unstable. She needs. Needs what? Mr. Chen interrupted sharply. The same help you've been insisting she needs since she started working with Richard. Tell me, Ms. Montgomery, in your expert legal opinion, what's the difference between quantum entanglement and quantum superposition? Catherine's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Julia, Mr. Chen turned to me. Would you explain the principle behind the quantum processing core you restored last month? Taking a deep breath, I launched into a detailed technical explanation, watching Catherine's face grow paler with each word. All those hours she dismissed as playing with old computers had actually been advanced engineering work. That's why Richard chose you, Mr. Chen said softly when I finished. While others saw broken machines, you saw the hidden patterns. You understood the code. But the inheritance, Catherine finally managed, her voice shrill. The paperwork we filed about Julia's competency was denied this morning, Mr. Harrison interjected, sliding a new document across the table. The judge was quite interested in Ms. Montgomery's recent patent applications. Now it was my turn to be surprised. Patent applications? Mr. Chen nodded. Your improvements to the quantum core design. Richard submitted them in your name before he died. They're already being reviewed by major tech companies. Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over. I'll contest the will. You'll what? I asked quietly, finding my voice at last. Tell everyone how you tried to have me declared incompetent to steal my inheritance? How you manipulated Grandpa in his final months? How you lied to the entire family about my mental state? I pulled out my phone, playing a recording. Catherine's voice, crystal clear, planning with her lawyer to have me committed. I have more, I said. Grandpa taught me the value of keeping good records. Mother gasped. Dad, who had been silent until now, put his head in his hands. 20 minutes ago, Mr. Chen added pleasantly, our legal team filed a countersuit against Ms. Montgomery for attempted fraud and defamation. The damages, even the value of the technology involved, could be quite substantial. The color drained from Catherine's face. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling, and she knew it. However, I said, surprising myself, there might be another option. All eyes turned to me as I opened my laptop, bringing up a complex organizational chart. Grandpa and Mr. Chen didn't just leave me patents. They left me a vision for how this technology should be used, and to implement that vision, we'll need lawyers who understand both technology and ethics. Catherine's eyes widened as she understood what I was offering. A way forward, albeit not the one she planned. The choice is yours, I continued. Fight us in court and risk everything, or help us change the world, this time as equals. Mr. Chen smiled approvingly, but added, of course, there would be conditions. Strict oversight, regular psychological evaluations. For Catherine, I finished, just to ensure she's competent to handle such responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The next 6 months transformed everything. The dusty antique shop became the public face of Montgomery Tech Innovations, while the workshop behind it evolved into a cutting-edge research facility. Every worthless vintage computer I'd restored now sat in a museum-quality display case, each one representing a different breakthrough waiting to be unveiled. The quantum processing patents alone are worth $4 billion now, Mr. Chen reported one morning, reviewing our latest valuations. And that's before the AI applications are factored in. I nodded, watching through the one-way glass as Catherine gave a tour to potential investors. My sister had surprised everyone, including herself, by excelling in her new role as our legal ethics officer, perhaps because for the first time in her life, she was building something instead of just acquiring it. The neural interface team needs your input, she said, joining us after the tour. Gone were the designer suits and condescending tone. Today she wore practical business attire and actually carried a technical manual under her arm. They found something interesting in Grandpa's old notes. Show me, I replied, following her to the research floor. Our relationship wasn't fully healed. Too much had been broken for that, but we found a new kind of respect. One based on actual achievements rather than appearances. The neural interface lab had been Grandpa's pride and joy, though he disguised it as a radio repair shop. Now it was at the forefront of human-computer interaction research. Look at this. Catherine pointed to a series of schematics. Grandpa predicted neural networking applications that we're just now developing the technology to build. But there's something else. She hesitated, then pulled out an old photograph. It showed Grandpa and Mr. Chen, much younger, standing with a group of scientists, including our grandmother who died before we were born. She was part of it too, Catherine said softly. All those stories about her being just a housewife. Mom and Dad never knew she was actually a quantum physicist. They never asked, I replied, studying the photo. Just like they never really asked what we were capable of. They just assumed. I did worse than assume, Catherine admitted. I actively tried to suppress your capabilities, because I was jealous. I looked at her in surprise. Jealous? Of what? Of your connection with Grandpa. Of how easily you understood things that I had to struggle to comprehend. It was easier to label you as broken than to admit you might be special. Before I could respond, Mom and Dad arrived for their weekly visit. They too had changed, humbled by the revelation of how wrong they'd been about everything. We brought lunch, Mom said, holding up bags from our favorite deli. If you're not too busy revolutionizing technology to eat with your parents. Over sandwiches in the break room, we shared updates about the business. Dad, a retired investment banker, actually asked intelligent questions about the technology now. Mom seemed more interested in how we were doing as people than in our corporate success. Your grandmother would be so proud, Dad said suddenly, surprising us all. She always said technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. You never told us about her work, I said gently. Because I never understood it, he admitted. It was easier to dismiss what I didn't understand. Just like with you, Julia. I'm sorry for that. After lunch, Mr. Chen called us all to the main lab. There's something you need to see, he said, bringing up a holographic display. We've finished decoding the last of Richard's hidden files. The display showed a complete global infrastructure, clean energy systems, advanced medical devices, communication networks that could reach the most remote areas. This was their real vision, Mr. Chen explained. Not just isolated breakthroughs, but a complete transformation of how technology serves humanity. And now, thanks to Julia's restoration work and Catherine's legal framework, we can finally implement it. It'll take years, Catherine mused, already making notes. The regulatory challenges alone. We have years, I smiled. And more importantly, we have each other. That evening, after everyone left, I sat in Grandpa's old workshop chair. The antique shop's front window still displayed vintage radios and typewriters, maintaining our cover story. But now I understood why Grandpa had always smiled at people's dismissive glances. Sometimes the greatest innovations hide in plain sight. Sometimes the person they call broken is actually seeing things too clearly. And sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's showing them a better way to be right. Catherine joined me, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The quantum team wants to name the new processor series after Grandma, she said. The Eleanor Project. I took the coffee, smiling. He planned all of this, didn't he? Even my gaming addiction. He knew you'd use it against me, knew it would keep our work hidden until the right time. He also knew I'd need to learn humility, she admitted. And that you'd need to learn to stand up for yourself. He played us both. No, I corrected gently. He taught us both. We just had to be ready to learn. Through the window, I could see our parents walking arm in arm to their car, looking more relaxed than they had in years. The weight of artificial expectations had finally lifted, replaced by genuine pride in what their daughters were actually achieving. The antique shop's bell chimed softly in the evening breeze, the same bell that had announced countless customers looking for simple repairs, never knowing they were standing in the birthplace of technological revolution. Some bells, it turns out, ring louder than others, and some inheritances are worth far more than money.